Welcome to the Environmental Leadership Chronicles, a podcast brought to you by the California Association of Environmental Professionals. In this episode, we delve into the world of generative AI with Gayani Weerasinghe, an intellectual property attorney, and Hobson Lane, an AI developer, professor, and social impact entrepreneur. As generative AI continues to evolve and become more integrated into our lives, we wanted to launch a mini-series on the practical applications and limitations of AI to frame discussions on how we can use it in the environmental industry. We discuss the legal considerations of using this powerful tool, as well as the opportunities it presents, including greater accessibility. And before we begin, a disclaimer that the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of the California Association of Environmental Professionals. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoy. Hi, I'm Jessa, and my pronouns are she, her.
Hi, I'm Corinne. My pronouns are also she, her.
And today we are featuring a panel on AI, generative AI, LLMs. And today we have Hobson Lane, who is an AI professional, a professor as well, and also a social impact entrepreneur. And then we're also joined by Gayani Weerasinghe, who is an intellectual property attorney. And today's panel will be hosted by Corinne Lytle-Bonine.
Thanks, Jess, and thanks everyone for joining us. We're really excited to put this panel together because we're doing something a little bit different. I think, amongst us environmental professionals, there's been probably all sorts of discussion about what does AI mean? What, are we going to have computers be writing environmental impact reports now to, wow, I'm, responding to emails a lot quicker using it. So we wanted to, start a kind of mini series with our podcast by discussing, AI. Probably they'll correct us on how to correctly identify and call it, but then also, speak with people who use this on a day-to-day basis and who have, practical use and then also limitations for this, maybe scary / opportunity that we're talking about, on a, nation, if not, global scale. So without further ado, I'd like to ask both of our guests, Hopson and Gayani, to introduce themselves and give a little bit more information about their background and why they're here.
Cool. I'm Hobson Lane. My pronouns are he, him. Yes, I'm a professor at UCSD Extension and Mesa College here in San Diego. We've also written the book on natural language processing and action at Manning Publishing. So we're on the second edition of that book. And of course, the big highlight was these large language models and AI that we're going to be talking about today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gayani Weerasinghe. As Jessa mentioned, I'm intellectual property and business law attorney. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and startups, and also there has been a lot of buzz about legal professionals using the AI, getting in trouble using AI, which has been covered in news. So this is just a pleasure to talk to everybody and kind of learning some of these stuff too. So, and as far as how I'm going to be referencing AI use here is I'm going to use generative AI as the umbrella term that will encompass LLMs and all these language, the other reactive AI or machine learning, all artificial intelligence, machine related stuff. So it's supposed to encompass all of that.
Excellent. Well, thank you both and welcome. And as we start off all of our podcasts, would you mind sharing your connection, if any, to AEP?
I have to say, this is me learning about AEP. Jessa invited me to this panel. So like I said, it's a pleasure to learn more about how the AI impact environment. I think it's a really important discussion that's not having that much exposure in the media.
Jessa introduced me to AEP as well, and we were talking about all the environmental impact of AI, and we've had several meetings at coffee shops to brainstorm about how we can utilize AI to better the world instead of sucking up more carbon.
Excellent. And I'm glad that Jessa, our podcast extraordinaire, is getting her fair share of shout outs because she works really hard on this. So appreciate you, Jessa.
Thank you, guys.
So to start us off, Hopson, maybe you could share a little bit about, your background with regenerative AI, how you use it, and, kind of what you see really as the, correct or at least a correct definition of regenerative AI.
Awesome. I wish it was regenerative, but unfortunately, it's just generative. What a large language model is something that tries to predict the next word. And so Gayani was just pointing out that we use them to generate text. And so that's why it's called generative AI. Yes, I'm also the co-founder of Tangible AI with Maria Dieschel. We wanted back in 2019, when the first big large language model came out, called BERT, she and I realized this is a huge opportunity for nonprofits and the social impact sector, where she has been focused her entire life. So we teamed up to build a company to support those nonprofits. And great, does that cover what you wanted to know?
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. And then maybe to you, Gayani, do you have a personal viewpoint on the use of AI or Chat GPT?
I think, when we first discussed doing this podcast, I was kind of in the other direction. I'm not really sure where I fall, because I could see as an intellectual property attorney where all the infringement issues can be, because these language models, this generative AI, is trained on material that was not licensed. That's a huge problem as a legal side, because you have to have a license to use creative medium. That's what copyright is. Copyright gives somebody a copyright give you the right to protect your original creative work that is fixated on a tangible medium. And if others are using those without your permission, then it's, there are some little bit of leeway with the fair use, but it's very small. But you hear a lot about these training models have been fed a lot of material. Obviously, I don't think have that license. So I was looking more in that direction, and going to your question, how do I feel about it? I have mixed feelings. And I think, I do think it's not something that's going to stop. It's like when the computers first came on board and you're the person who like writing, these are going to keep working. I think how we adapt to it and how we responsibly use it and ethically, use it in a way that we wouldn't create liability for our clients or the other businesses, and also honor those who create these work, who have copyrights. That's where I will stand on that. So that might be a little bit of a long answer, but that's where I have arrived at.
No, we like long answers here, especially with complicated subjects like this. Hobson, what about you?
So, yeah, AI is, the promise and peril. With the Oppenheimer movie, it's comparable to sort of nuclear technology. It can be used for good and evil, and people tend to think of it as being that way, that it's just some sort of a dangerous thing that we can sort of regulate and deal with that way. But unfortunately, it's quite different than nuclear technology, because it's a technology that can actually build itself. It's the first technology that we've ever come up with as a human species that can build something that's comparable to us in our ability to think. At least we think it might be. And scientists think that date at which we are able to build such a thing has come closer because of large language models. And so it's like bringing in to existence a new alien species. and giving that alien species influence over the planet that we live on. Not only an environmental impact, but obviously the social societal impact. So one of my biggest concern about AI is it's continuing to facilitate the manipulation of users, literally making us users of a drug, this technology, like social media and other media, and manipulating us in order to extract money from us and monetize it, because we live in a capitalist world. And another aspect of that problem is that only the powerful have access to these things. So the company OpenAI disingenuously named themselves that. They do not share this technology with the world. It's not open source. It's not in any way open. And so it's only under the control of billionaires. It's having such a powerful technology that's, perhaps 10 times more impactful on society than nuclear technology, and having it in the hands of a few elite is a real danger to society, and it creates a lot of harm in the form of misinformation and bias and discrimination and greater disparity of wealth. So I'm unfortunately embedded in this world where AI is more of a danger than an opportunity for me. It's ethical and just existential.
Yeah, I think, when we, see news coverage or read news articles, it really is that huge spectrum of, this is going to be the best thing for, communities. We're going to get so much done quicker, faster, all the way to the spectrum of, every white collar worker is going to lose their job, all the way to, Terminator. Like, so is there, anything that you would, like to include in kind of the framing of this discussion before we get into kind of the nitty gritty of how we all use it? But, are things being overblown? Are they being underblown? If we're, talking about, we think this might work, but it needs to be regulated. Are we capable of regulating it? Or, Hobson, I think you gave a really good overview, and I'm, is there any other kind of big picture items that you think we should frame before, like I said, we get into kind of the details of how we're using it and why?
At the social policy and ethics and philosophy level, there's a split in the debate around whether we should be talking about, where we're spending most of our time talking and worrying about AI ethics, or whether we should be worried about AI safety. So that Terminator problem, that's the AI safety problem. Is this thing going to, or the control problem, it's also called. So the billionaires have signed up for that form of the problem because they think they want to be able to control this thing that they're building in order to be able to exploit us. And so they're only worried about that. The rest of society is really worried about AI ethics. So when these billionaires are able to control it, are they attempting to use it in a way that's ethical, that's supportive of society and helpful and pro-social and all the things that are not being demonstrated right now at that level of and this is and another thing that's to keep an aware. We've kind of become numb, but there are $100 billion companies that are being created and destroyed almost weekly, from Twitter to Facebook and Meta and OpenAI itself and Microsoft's Bing. These companies are being built and destroyed almost at such a rapid pace. The technology is already bringing about extreme change in the world. So I think most of my concern will be about the AI ethics, the harm that's happening now, right now, in the world, as opposed to this hypothetical sci-fi problem of, well, if we lose control of it, it's going to take over the world. AI safety versus AI ethics. Sorry, or ethics versus safety.
No, I think that's a great breakdown. So getting into, maybe more, on the ground applications of it, Gayani especially, what are the potential legal implications in the workplace. From your point of view, we've seen, the lawyer who had fake citations in the brief that was drafted by AI, and that's maybe a more extreme scenario, but what are you seeing in your practice?
Well, I think actually it's this is a tool in legal industry, and there was this survey that was done by Lexis, which is one of the leading software. They do the case management of the cases, shepherdizing. If you're an attorney, these cases, and they did a survey of about, I think it's like 1,100 attorneys, 1,176 US lawyers, and 1,239 law students, and 1,765 consumers about the AI and what they feel about it. And I had to say, lawyers are actually in a little more of a knowledgeable place on AI, actually, and what the survey found. And there are a lot of attorneys and students who think that this can be a good tool that can be used properly and ethically, that if it's regulated. So I think that's where we are coming at now. As far as the existential crisis of whether we are creating something, I think for me, that's like a little bit right now, I don't know enough information to comment on something like that, because I defer to experts in the field on that. But looking at where we are right now and how the legal field have evolved, I had to say, there was a time when attorneys who are doing a case have to go through these federal reporters, these books, to look at cases to see what case is the current case, the current law. And, these kind of tools have really come a long way to help us practice better, because now we just go to like Westlaw or, Lexis or one of these sites, and they pull up all the cases, tell you what's the good law, what's not, and you could go read it. So the problem is when what happened in this New York case, and I'm sure everybody is a little more aware because it's been covered widely, that they used ChatGPT to draft the brief, and then they validated the cases that were output through ChatGPT. And that's the problem, because that's a new tool. You cannot rely on a new tool to validate itself. It's like asking somebody, okay, did you do this right? And then asking, well, are you sure you did it right? That's a very not a good place to be as an attorney. And I do have to say, with ethics and where legal field is, I've seen there are judges who are saying if you used this kind of tool, you had to certify it. There are some judges, I think there's a Texas judge that says you cannot use AI tools, generative AI, in any kind of legal pleadings or writings. There are others. So there's different point of views being pushed out right now. And I think in the next few years, we're going to see this, because like Hobson referenced, this is part of Microsoft tools. This is part of these legal software have the AI tools incorporated. I just saw Zoom has incorporated AI. So now the issue is also how they're using this. I do worry about privacy too, because one of the things I saw on a post somebody posted, I haven't verified this, so I'm just sharing it as a point of discussion, is that Zoom's update to AI, they say you have an option to whether your data, the voice, and would not be used without your consent, but there is no opt-out of that. So that's kind of issue is a big issue, because they're collecting this data, and whose hands this data is going to be. And we're going to see data privacy, cybersecurity, all of these fields going to be impacted, and it's going to be on the professionals, the consumers. And not to mention, if you're getting generative AI to write up something, you might actually be copying somebody else's work. because it doesn't know how to authenticate what is this, the hallucinations, right? I will let maybe Hobson describe a little bit about the hallucinations, but the problem with that is there's no authentication that is can it just generates stuff, is spitting it out, and of course we are looking at a baby form right now, right? So but that's the issue with legal field, and some of the things I wanted to discuss.
Wonderful. That's that brings up the big concern that I have, is that it's sharing misinformation, and that we are treating it as truth. We're treating it as a human companion. We're anthropomorphizing it. We're utilizing it for things that we shouldn't be using it for in terms. And that particular situation that Gayani was talking about was where the attorneys, I think, were aware of this fact, but it was helpful for their legal case to ignore it. So this is another problem in industry, all industries, is where you can say, oh, it's not my fault, it's the AI's fault. And so they were trying to exploit this brief window of time when people didn't really understand what it's doing to claim ignorance, to use it to purport to have to provide a briefing to a judge that says these were cases that these are all the cases that support our case, and they clearly say that we're right and we win, when and all of those cases were made up. And this is because I'll give a brief introduction to how the chat GPT is trained and why it is this way. Why doesn't it just share us the truth? Why isn't it like Google search? Well, it's not designed to be. It's designed to manipulate us. It's designed to be a sycophant, or some people will call it a stochastic parrot, a random parrot that basically just it's designed to please us. If you've used ChatGPT and their web interface, you'll notice the like button. This is the same problem that Facebook ran into. As soon as you create a like button, it creates a whole feedback mechanism where the person on the other side of the like button is going to try to get those likes. And it creates an incentive for providing sensational or interesting or influence, essentially. And that's what this chatbot has learned, because those like button counts are fed back through the system to improve what the words that it's predicting. So when you start out a prompt, it can obviously be answered in an infinite number of ways. And so that very first word that comes out, it has to choose among many possibilities of what directions it could go. And then the next word after that, and the next word after that. And that's all based on how many likes will this word get? How many likes will this word get? How many likes will this word get? And so those words are designed to feed you in particular, so it can detect in your prompt the kinds of things you're interested in and what your motivations are, and it's going to be a sycophant and try to please you with its response. And so in the case of these lawyers, it was just providing them exactly what they wanted. Some case studies that showed that, I'm not sure what you call them, but these documents and these references to documents that didn't exist, such that their case could be won. And OpenAI does not in any way remind you of that with any of their interface. They try to make it look like a chat, like a conversation with another thinking, intelligent object, whether it's an alien or a robot or whatever, but they're acting like it's thinking. No, it's not. It's just, it can't do math. It can't do elementary school math. It cannot do common sense reasoning. I could go into a lot more details about its capabilities technically, but it's not doing any of the things that OpenAI is advertising that it does. And so people that use it incorrectly can't be blamed for that.
So I did recently see, because I did open a ChatGPT account to just see what it is. And they do put a disclaimer out. I don't know if it's a new thing that says that this cannot be reliable, that it tend to have hallucinations. This might be because of what was happening, a new implementation. So I did find that, I don't know, like I said, it's a recently I engaged much with ChatGPT, so I'm not sure when they implemented that, but they are putting it out now that do say that you need to verify your own or something to that effect. There's a disclaimer in place.
Yeah, I can add to that. And just to be explicitly clear, is that OpenAI is the company that operates ChatGPT, because ChatGPT is in the media all the time. And that's, I consider myself a layperson in this sense. And then when I go to ChatGPT, I'll type in ChatGPT, and then it's like, oh no, it's OpenAI. And then it's just confused me. So I just wanted to put that out there. And I actually have it open in another window. So I'm like, what question should I ask? No, I'm kidding. But there is a statement at the bottom of the page, and this may be part of what you're referencing, where it says free research preview. ChatGPT may produce inaccurate information about people, places, or facts. And then there's a link to an August 3rd version. And then I haven't dug into that, but that may be pretty recent. So that is now at the bottom of the text prompt on the page.
I saw that. And I do think going to like everyday use of this kind of technology, one of the things that marketing people or any of the other people who are generating reports using this type of generative AI software have to be worried about, like I mentioned before, is the copyright issues. Because it could be grabbing information that were not licensed and creating something, and the copyright infringement goes to not just the company that facilitated it, but the user as well. So this is, going back to a long time when like the songs were getting shared without the license, right? Like there was this very long time ago, but there's DMCA notices. I actually don't know the acronym stands for off top of my head. I will have to share that for the description. But DMCA notices in the websites, and you could send to somebody saying his copyright written work, you need to take it down, or like YouTube taking down material that have it. So I do think there are we will see some things in parallel, similar way. And then these companies, there are lawsuits currently in courts. I know that I actually haven't done enough research to reference specifics, but that are getting sued for using some of these material, like the Getty images. Might be one of them. I don't know if they file a lawsuit, but I know there was a threat of a lawsuit. So there are these, and these images actually show that actual image that was used. So that's the problem. That's because it plagiarism problems. These are the problems that really the creatives right now have to think about. And then, of course, as a professor, I'm sure I wonder how you're going to handle like people turning turn papers, right? Like using generative AI to respond to things.
Yeah, exactly. First, those two big issues you brought up. The first is the data and privacy. And copyrights. So when I was talking about companies being created and destroyed, the ones I was talking about being destroyed were like Twitter and Reddit and others that have built their empires on user data, where users post things and they expect it to be there forever and available to anyone, including themselves. And if they want to take it down like they can in Europe, they should be able to delete it. Once they saw ChatGPT utilizing all that data to make billions of dollars on the sale to Microsoft of ChatGPT by OpenAI, then they said, oh, we want a piece of that ourselves. And so Musk bought Twitter, and the CEO of Reddit started to lock it down and started to charge users for it. Our data that we gave freely under different terms and conditions than what's being offered now is now being used to make money off of us and to exploit us. And that's the kind of dialogue that it knows how to speak, is the Twitter dialogue and the Reddit dialogue, the sensational, inflammatory, nonsensical misinformation. And so, but anyway, the other one that you mentioned was in academia. Yes, my students and teachers are all concerned with the cheating aspect of it. And that's And it's actually, instead of being an efficiency improver as it is in most, and like in the software development world, this model is actually useful in terms of it's really good at doing language modeling, doing translation, including translation from human natural language into code. And so software developers are using it with very good effect on their efficiency to give them ideas about the next thing to write, the next kinds of lines of code to write. It's extremely useful in that area. But when you ask somebody writing a term paper, if they're asking what's the next line of our next paragraph I should write, or even use it to write the entire paragraph, that's a problem because it's going to be trying to please that user. And you can't just say, well, there'll be a lot of obviously incorrect facts in the article. There are models that do not include misinformation, and so those students are going to be able to use them to write very convincing essays and answers to questions. Of course, it passed the law exam, I think, and the MBA graduate exam. So these models can be used to simulate or imitate human intelligence in the academic world, and that's a problem. And it's taking away from teacher efficiency because we have to spend more and more of our time trying to come up with very creative questions that can't be easily answered by a large language model or generative AI. So yeah, it's a real burden on teachers to deal with this new technology rather than an efficiency improvement.
Hearing off of that, though, what are there opportunities for efficiency approval? Aren't we already seeing them in things like, as simple as predictive text and email, or being able to kind of tone up or tone down the tone of an email with the push of a button? Or I know, all three of you, including Jessa, use generative AI on a day-to-day basis. So I'd be interested to hear a little bit more from everyone about how are you using it now, and maybe how it is working in its current form.
I could quickly mention that this kind of segues into the social impact side. We're using it with effect to teach students, middle schoolers in Africa, teach them math. So because it can do middle school math, but not quite high school math, and it does an okay job, we can use it to answer their questions like tell me a joke, or we can use it for non-substantive things and combine it with what's called a rule-based chatbot that is more rigid in the kinds of curriculum that it's going to be presenting to the students. So we can use it in a way to keep the student engaged without allowing it to any of its misinformation to infect the students' minds. So it is being used, and that offloads a lot of the day for many teachers in Africa right now for this particular chatbot called Rory that is deployed there with thousands of students per day. And you can imagine how those conversations with a teacher would have taken up that teacher's time. So yes, you're right. It's a big efficiency improvement in some areas of education and social impact.
I think I referenced this before, like the case law, that's kind of thing where it's make it easier for attorneys to move from one task to another. That can be a really great tool. It's been a great tool, and it's keep improving those areas. Like if you had to put a memo together, and if you could pull some of these information together faster, that you're billing less time for the client, so it's good for the client, and your response time is faster. So there's a lot of ways that can be efficient, and I know that there are judges and the lawyers are looking at how accessibility for the legal can be better. And I don't really think it's it's going to replace my profession anytime soon. Partly because we also write the rules, and we are the ones, most of the people who are making the laws are lawyers. So, but at the same time, I do think there are tasks that can be outsourced to generative AI, but long as you had to be always going to be responsible as the attorney. So that's the other part to it. I saw one of the malpractice insurance companies have put out a bulletin that how they are not going to cover any malpractice created because the attorney used generative AI without checking other sources. So there are going to be restrictions on attorneys' ability to use it too. Like I mentioned before, the judges saying you cannot use it with my code. That's the main thing. The judges saying that will control how you submit. And if you submit something, you can get disciplined or debarred. There's, I think those two attorneys in New York, because it's one of the first of a kind case, there were some they only, I think they got like $5,000 fine or something. That judge was very upset about what they represented to the court. That's going to get worse. It's the first of a kind, so it may have gotten some leniency, but that's not going to be the case going forward if attorneys are using it in a way that is detrimental to the clients, or billing for time that you are not working on and letting a chat box do the work. Those are the sort of things where I could really see discipline coming in and getting attorneys in trouble. So there's efficiency and there's discipline. So, we always care about our licenses. So at least I think a lot of us should do. So I think that's going to be a matter, how that is represented. And California is very protective, consumer protective. So California state bar is very protective of consumers, and so it's going to be making some rules that will apply to us, and we might see across the country different rules come up with different states that allow and disallow, because California also have very strict rules about privacy, a little bit similar to Europe, data privacy, versus with the big companies, there's of course some specifics versus rest of the country. So, you're going to see those changes and how they apply to the state specifically also.
And I'm curious, realistically, do you think that either on a state by state basis or nationally, there's even an ability to provide those, kind of regulations and rules that,
I think there's going to be coming down. There have been, of course, from both sides, people who love generative AI, the companies who want to use generative AI, talking to Congress to create a congressional action on these so that it will be the law across the country. And then there's going to be things that's going to get pushed back. So I think the key is we're going to see how they get litigated and what the judges and the courts are going to say about how these laws or these rules are going to get applied to specific cases. So that's the other thing. It's like our cases and the facts of those cases always have an impact on how those rules get interpreted, how the rule was interpreted. So you can never say, oh, this case came out this per se. For instance, I will share the Sharia of Dawn, which is, I think, was known, Copyright Office issued a state opinion on this. Basically, it's a comic book created by Christina Castanova, who was filed for copyright of this comic book, but she used Midjourney, generative AI, to create some of the images. And initially, I believe she got the copyright, but then it was revealed that it was partly done with Midjourney use. So the Copyright Office went back and looked at how much of it she contributed, how much of it was the Midjourney, and actually issued an opinion. And right now, the copyright law, as it stands, generative AI cannot have copyright. It's had to be a human. And it doesn't matter how much is time or substance that the generative AI put versus the creator. Creator is defined at the moment as the human. So if you want to own a copyright. Like if you're creating stuff, you want to copyright it, you have to have been a human. So you need to watch out how much you're using these tools. Same thing goes for patents. So there was a case called Teller versus Vidal that issued that it's only humans that can be an inventor of a patent right, like can get an application for a patent. You cannot get a patent on something that AI generated. So, so there are laws already coming in place. And there's an article going to be coming out in San Diego Lawyer that I co-wrote with a colleague of mine. And we talk about how if you want intellectual property rights, it's had to be human created or invented. So I will just leave it there.
That brings a really interesting problem to society. There is, how do we know whether it was, how we can't always trust that the creator of either a legal brief or an essay or a painting is going to admit whether they use generative AI or not. And so we have to develop tools to detect it. There have been tools in the past. There is technology that does make it possible for, even in text, to embed what's called a watermark, which makes it possible to detect if passages of text, and I think it's about 100 words are enough to put in those subtle shifts of wording such that it can be detected as being generated by a particular model. Unfortunately, the OpenAI solution was just the opposite, where they said, oh, we can build a model to detect it. And then of course, when they went to deploy it, it was about 10% accurate. That means 10% of the articles they got correct that were fake, were generated by AI, were detected as being AI. So they can't even detect, they don't even have the technology in place internally to detect it. So it's going to have to be regulated by people like Gayani, and that in a way that the providers of the technology are required to insert those things that indicate whether or not it was generated by AI or not, whether it's text or images. Watermarking images is quite straightforward, but text, it's also possible. I'll just bring that up.
There's definitely, that's a really good point. There's legal ramifications for lying on a submission like a copyright application or patent. Those actually include breaching federal law. So you are attesting to that. And I tell my clients I'm in the transactional side. So when I'm filing something, I do an interview with them and I talk to them. I try to find much information as I can. So I do think, again, there's going to be gatekeeping responsibility for attorneys, what they're submitting, because so I'm not prosecuting patents anymore, but the patent, as a patent attorney, I could tell you, you are supposed to be the one determining who is the inventor. It's not usually you see in academic settings and others where they will try to add everybody who worked on a project as a publication to a patent, and that doesn't work that way. Inventorship is determined by who came up with the idea, how it's conceptualized, how is it reduced to practice, who contributed to it. So you could have one person who contributed 90% and one person who contributed 10% or 1%. They're both equally inventors in a patent. So same thing with patent inventive rights. I think there's going to be a discussion. What tools did you use? Did you use AI? And if you do, what, there might have to do some disclaimers when you're submitting, because it is attorney responsibility. There's ethical, we actually have ethical responsibilities when we are submitting something to a court or like to a regulatory body or USPTO, United States Patent and Trademark Office, or Copyright Office. So I think that's what it is. But you're also going to see people who's going to know and going to say that copyright or that patent is invalid, because I know for a fact this person was bragging about how much they used AI. So you're going to see that kind of cases too that come up, like not just detection from, hopefully we will have good software that can detect it, but we also going to get these, where people talk, and then you're risking your right. If you actually have an inventorship wrong on a patent, that patent is invalid. You lose the rights. So I think I do actually tell companies, the startups especially, you had to be very careful how you draft a patent and who's the inventors. Make sure you give credit, because if you forgot somebody or you leave out somebody and they come back and show that they were part of it and you were left out, that you can lose the patent. So that's how you break patents in patent litigation. You look for who was there and who was included, who was not included. So those things can really matter when it's come to this kind of stuff too. If AI was used, somebody say, "Oh, we didn't use it," but then there's somebody else say, "Yeah, they did." So it's an area of litigation, good for attorneys in some ways, bad for attorneys in other ways, of course.
I like the cycle of making attorneys' lives easier to making more work for attorneys in order to litigate these issues to, having that catch-22.
It's why AI cannot replace us yet. We are part of the cycle.
What about, I know this is something we touched on earlier, but, putting my environmental professional hat on, I think Hopson, especially, you're really well informed about what, the environmental impacts are going to be of an increased reliance or growing reliance on generative AI. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that from you.
Well, just to lay the groundwork, it took about 5,000 metric tons of carbon to create ChatGPT-3 or GPT-3. That was about 3 months of thousands of computers working in parallel to create it, and that's equivalent to about, depending on the occupancy of an airplane, but it's equivalent to about 500,000 flights across the Atlantic by individuals. So that's a huge environmental impact just to create the one revision of this chatbot. Now we're on GPT-4, and so that carbon footprint has been repeated again, and the use of it every day. So these things can type at about 200 to 300 words per minute, and each one of those tokens can cost, each one of those chats can cost about a penny per back and forth that you have with a large language model. And if you cost that out, it's and that efficiency of thinking that you're doing with that is very low compared to the human brain. So in comparison, the human brain, so like your desktop computer might run at 2 kilowatts, and your brain runs at about 80 watts, an equivalent calories of food that's going into your body. And so it's a small light bulb compared to a PC. And of course, the thought that you get out of a human mind is much better than what you're going to get out of and the computer that I just mentioned, the 2,000 watts for a desktop, that's not at all the kind of compute that's required for these models. It's a server farm, and it scales very poorly and inefficiently. It's a whole building complex that's required to run these models, and so the environmental impact is huge.
Is a solution, or maybe as we're talking about how we need to regulate or make requirements for this, could it be to require that these processing farms and these huge complexes be powered by carbon-free electricity?
That's a great idea, and that's afoot at but in many ways that's just greenwashing the problem, because if that green electricity is being used for ChatGPT, it could have been used for something else, like heating somebody's home or air conditioning a place in sub-Saharan Africa or something. I mean, simply saying that we use green energy is not enough. That just creates incentives in the world to create more green energy, which is a good thing. But we also have to consider, are we using our resources effectively to support society, or are we using it to exploit society? And are we spending that energy wisely to create good in the world, or is it creating harm in the world?
And I was thinking about this as you guys were speaking, and as an entrepreneur, business owner, I use it for efficiency. And when I use ChatGPT, and when I use it, it's so I can be more productive. And I feel like there's societal pressure, especially where we're based. California is the 5th largest economy in the world, maybe 6th. Last I heard, I think was 5th. And so it's like produce. And so in theory, I should be able to use ChatGPT or whoever we could use, generative AI, to make our lives simpler, easier, and not work as much. Whereas I see it the opposite, where, now I can do twice as much. I can do even more with this tool. And so thinking about it from that aspect and the environmental impact, it's, theoretically, we could have these server farms run and humans would consume less because there's not as much to do. You don't need to be on Zoom meetings. You don't need to be at a computer or using electricity, doing all these things. It makes everything more efficient. But in reality, what I hear you saying is we're just doubling up on all the usage and energy.
Yeah, it is an additional expense and an additional effort. And yeah, that's a societal issue, where and these, it's like marketing. I don't live in your world of marketing, but it feels like to me, the more marketing there is, the more marketing there needs to be. It's almost like a self-perpetuating cycle where, your competitor puts out more marketing, so I better put out more marketing. And so if you have AI that's helping you generate more stuff, then your competitor is going to have to generate more stuff. And that points, something that I am more familiar with is the fact that you're lucky to be able to have access to ChatGPT, to be able to afford to use ChatGPT, to have the technical proficiency to be able to use it. And other marketers don't. And so they are going to feel the pressure to get up to speed in order to compete in this world of marketing. And so the economic divide between the haves and the have-nots is growing larger and larger as these technologies become more and more vital to getting work done.
I want to, in addition to the, potential efficiencies that it does bring individuals, could it be used at all to lower the barrier for entry for either, key groups or, one of the things that I was talking about with a friend who's an occupational therapist is that she sees a lot of future in lowering the barrier to entry for some of the disabled community, especially with physical disabilities, where, someone, who has access to generative AI who can, write notes much quicker because they have, predictive text and can, kind of do that better for someone. Are there other instances where, if regulated well, we can use it for social good?
Yeah, absolutely. I worked at IRA here in San Diego, where we were building glasses for the blind, helping them interpret the world through their ears by giving them descriptions of what's going on around them. But the technology we were using was very resource efficient. It had to run on a mobile phone. It had to even run with it embedded in glasses. And so that technology was available, and that was 4 years ago or 5 years ago that we were able to demonstrate that technology. It was not utilized because it was not ChatGPT. I don't know. There are efficient ways to do those things, and they're not being used. Unfortunately, that particular project was canceled, and that product never went on the market. And they're now talking about using large language models to do the exact same thing we were already able to do at a much cheaper and more efficient way. And so, it can be. You're right. It does help people with accessibility needs, and it is a huge boost in their lives. Yeah, that's all I'll say.
I will add to this discussion about accessibility and maybe more inclusiveness. The challenge with some of it is, I think there was some article about recent publication with, I think, BuzzFeed or something. They use one of these generative AI models to create images, Barbie images of certain, these, and they pulled that article because it's actually showed the bias within the system, and that's a huge problem because they are being trained and they're being trained to pick up the same biases, so maybe even worse biases that we see in the society that we are trying to work against or like to be more expansive. So when you are looking at somebody who's a doctor or attorney, they will create a generative image that is probably doesn't look like me. For those who are listening to the podcast, I am South Asian. I'm a woman of color. So I think the challenge is that if these generative AI also pick up the same biases that are prevalent in our society, especially in some sectors, then we are really going to be keeping some people out too, unless that's corrected. So other thing with technology improvements, like one of the things I've been more sensitive to is because I'm dark skinned. I seen where certain technology, like same laptop camera that works well with Zoom for me, actually doesn't work well for Google Meet. So it was making my skin tone wasn't coming up well, and that's a problem because it's not just for vanity purposes. When there's implicit bias, somebody how they appear, how they come, you make judgments. These judgments, right? And these judgments are based on image your brain is getting. And if I'm coming off where I'm grainy or I'm look like I'm a hot mess because the camera is like not lighting my image well, that is something that's taken in. So same thing happened with oximeters and those thermometers that are detecting the temperature from the forehead. They were not detecting darker pigmented skins well. Now, why I bring this up in this kind of setting is because these are also technology incorporated into these. So that's where we really have to discuss it. Is it accessible to everybody? When Siri first came out, I wasn't able to talk to Siri because of my accent. It's always had issues. Now, of course, I could train it, right? But that's the thing. The technology need to be trained in different societal groups and access, like what Hobson was talking about, like in other, maybe Africa and all these other places. These training models have to get there too, not just be a tool that we could send out, but a tool that was also trained. Otherwise, it's not usable. I will stop there.
That's a really great segue into the sort of unseen, transparent effect these things are having on us. These are tools. First, we make our tools, and then our tools make us. This is a quote by a famous philosopher. I can't remember his name, but these tools are changing us. They're exacerbating biases. They're exacerbating division in society. And so we need to find tools that where the company itself at least is trying to be fair and ethical in the way that they're using it. OpenAI is not, ChatGPT is not. And one company that is trying to give you factual information that will never, ever try to lie to you, that is not a sycophant, is one called u.com. It's a search engine similar to Google. They have a u.com/chat that you can use. It's slightly more ethical and less polluting of your mind if you use a chatbot like that rather than ChatGPT. So I'd encourage people to at least check it out and consider it as in your toolbox of things to use. And anything, of course, coming out of the open source community. You want to support things like Llama 2 and Hugging Face. Sorry, that's my speech, my preach.
No, I love it. And that actually, is in line with, I think, what I'd like to leave as a closing question to each of you is, what is your message to environmental professionals who are, maybe both excited and at least from my opinion, after hearing this podcast, maybe a little more scared about what generative AI can do for the environmental profession. So we'll start with you, Hobson.
Okay, great. So the Salton Sea is being mined for precious metals, and a previously polluted environment is becoming a source of resource for the sustainable economy of electric vehicles, and that sort of thing. You can imagine all the ways in which AI is being used to facilitate that engineering work. So in the engineering world, especially in robotics and automation, these tools and software development, these tools are extremely beneficial. And of course, whenever you're using that in the environmental industry, it can be a big boost. It can help you make technologies, sustainable technologies, become competitive with non-sustainable extractive technologies. So there is a ray of hope, and many engineers who are conscious of that are utilizing it in very ethical and useful ways.
I think my the take is that just because you can, doesn't mean you should. So I will leave it at that. I think you want to consider what the implications are, whether that efficiency is worth the trouble it's going to create, all these factors. And I think having these ethical considerations and really kind of learning more about it, where you will help you develop where you want to stand on it. I'm always a proponent of knowledge is power. So that's where I will leave it at.
No, that's great. In the immortal words of Jurassic Park, like just because you could doesn't mean that you should. So I think that's a great closeout. Well, I really sincerely want to thank you both for joining our podcast today. I learned so much, and I think that this is going to be really valuable for our listeners. I'll turn it over to Jessa for any other closing thoughts.
Yeah, again, just want to echo Corinne. Thank you guys so much. I have spoken with you each on this topic outside of this podcast, and I learned a lot, and I learned even more today. And so I just know how valuable this will be. And, I think, Gayani, you said something earlier, like this is, when computers came to the market, it's like, this isn't going away. So how can we learn to work with it in an ethical way and a knowledgeable way? And I think you guys really highlighted a lot of points for all of us to consider. So thank you guys so much.
Really enjoyed it. It's been an eye-opener.
Yes, I learned a lot too. And I really thank you all for having me on this podcast.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to be updated when new episodes are released, and leave us a review to let us know what you think. It also really helps us to share the podcast with others who may enjoy learning about the environmental industry. If you want to submit a shout out or any feedback, please send an email or voice memo to podcast@califaep.org. The email again is podcast with an S, podcast@califaep.org.